as I started to develop the heroine's journey, I realized that besides writing personal myth, what I was really listening to with the students was their life from a mythic point of view.
Across the globe, storytellers are flipping the script. In books, in film, in TV, theatre and art. I'm Kimberley Lipschus and this is The Storymakers Rebellion, a podcast about the rule breakers, trailblazers and visionaries who are shaping stories on their own terms. Maureen Murdock is a Jungian psychotherapist, a teacher and a best-selling author whose books have been translated into 23 languages. She weaves myth, story and memoir, and her groundbreaking, The Heroine's Journey, reframed women's psychological and spiritual quests. Her other works continue to shape how we see our inner lives. She believes memoirists are today's mythmakers, and her own descent informed the 10-stage process of the Heroine's Journey model that continues to shape how we understand women's inner narratives. Well, firstly, I would like to say thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being here, Maureen. I'm genuinely thrilled to be having this conversation. And your life's work has been devoted to exploring the psycho-spiritual storytelling from the storyteller's perspective. And it's been profound in my personal journey. So it's truly an honour and I welcome you today.
Thank you, Kimberley. It's a pleasure for me, and I'm excited to know you're in Australia.
Yes, and you're in fall, as you call it, as of a few days ago, and we are in spring.
Oh, that's right. Oh.
Yeah, everything's flipped, including the moon.
Yeah, we have a full moon. So your moon must be full too, right?
Yeah, it is.
That's great. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That might be perfect for our discussion.
Oh, well, actually, let's launch right in. So my first question is, when did your purpose, your life's purpose, first speak to you? And how did you rise to meet it?
That's a pretty big question. Life's purpose. I grew up Irish Catholic, going to Mass every day as probably from 5 to 17. And at that time, I thought my purpose was to become a nun. And I did not enter the convent, but I guess I felt called to be a teacher in terms of purpose. Interesting question. When I would go to Mass every day, I always knelt in front of the Blessed Mother, in front of the statue of Mary. And I always thought that she was God. So I had a very early connection to the sacred feminine. And I think it probably unconsciously guided me to become a teacher, a writer, a psychotherapist, and to focus my work on women's development, women's journey.
That's interesting that it came so early through, the archetype of Mother Mary as well, that you really felt that connection.
Well, my name is Maureen, which is Gaelic for Mary. So I think that was also part of the secret mythology, if you will.
Predestined in the stars.
Yes, I was just thinking the stars that are upright and upside down.
Yes, depending on the perspective.
Yes, exactly. So today, since you're in Australia and I'm in Santa Barbara, our stars are upside down and right side up.
And that's actually a perfect segue because the heroine's journey and all of this women's inner work is never linear. And so I guess we could just start with your extensive work as a memoirist. What what was your connection to myth and memoir? To who am I and to whom do I belong?
Well, growing up, I did not study mythology, but I always heard the lives of the saints. So that was a particular type of mythology that I grew up with. And I started teaching creative writing at UCLA Extension Writers Program in the early 90s. And Joseph Campbell's monomyth of the hero's journey had already come out. So I was teaching what at that time I didn't realize was memoir, using his monomyth, using the diagram of the hero's journey. And then as I started to develop the heroine's journey, I realized that besides writing personal myth in our program, what I was really listening to with the students was their life from a mythic point of view, because of listening to some of the same patterns that were coming up over and over, whether it was the mother-daughter relationship or the father-son relationship, or about betrayal, or about the loss of innocence, or about the fall from grace, or about trials, or about a need for integration of the masculine and feminine. All of those themes were coming out in the students' work. And so I started to investigate memoir. And at that time, there were no memoirs in my local bookstore. There were autobiographies, mostly written by men about their challenges and their exploits and their successes, but not one memoir by a woman writer. And that changed in 1994 when Mary Karr's Liars Club came out. And since then, memoir has just developed and developed. And so my book, Myth Making, is about the overlap between memoir and myth.
When you talk about the bookstores, you noticed the absence. So standing as a representative for the women, there's a real absence here. What's going on, and following your curiosity.
Right. It's like, how come there's no women's voice? And so Mary Karr really started the memoir movement for women in particular, because she opened up her life to us. And so other women started to look with a particular point of view or angle of perception at their lives and think, okay, I want to take this particular incident or this particular memory and mine it, M-I-N-E, to see what's really going on. It's not just a memory. It's not just an incident. There's probably a pattern to my whole life, which is very similar to myth. So as it has evolved in a beautiful way, as women have found the courage to write what they never thought they had the courage to write.
And in, I think it was your PhD, we were talking about the autobiographies of men around that time, was about what they did, what they achieved. And everything you're talking about now is finding the place to, like you say, mine their story, not about what they achieved, but about their experiences.
Yeah, it was very interesting in the early 90s having men and women in the class, because, as you just said, the men were writing about their accomplishments, which was wonderful. But when the women started to bring in issues of their sexuality, or this was in Los Angeles, so I had a lot of students who were recent immigrants. So when they were writing about the struggles of immigration, the men started getting very uncomfortable. In the class, when I first started teaching memoirs, a pretty even balance between men and women. But as women started to talk about their emotions, or particularly if they talked about their bodies, I started to lose the men in my class.
It's like, oh, we can't deal with this.
Right, yeah. And that's what's key to memoir is emotional truth. And so I think it was a challenge for the men at that time. And it's still a challenge for anyone who writes memoir, really being able to put on paper for other people to read what our emotional truth is.
And the memoir is putting it into a public space. That's a very courageous act.
It is. Some of the women memoirists, like Chanel Miller, wrote a book about having been raped by a Stanford student called Know My Name, because she wanted to name herself and him, not only in the legal suit, but also on the page. And it was such a courageous piece of work and has, of course, inspired so many other women who have been sexually harassed or abused to come forward. She probably didn't realize at all that she was opening the floodgates for other women to speak the truth.
Deeply pioneering work without realising that she was opening, like you say, a floodgate for other people to go, I can too. I want my voice out there.
Right, exactly.
That's really interesting because I think I was mentioning to you on the questions before about the group of people, the French filmmakers in 9/11 who were following the firefighters, Gideon and Jules Nadet, and they just happened to be filming them when 9/11 occurred. And there's profound footage of the decisions that they made not to put the camera on the people jumping out of the buildings, but the camera was on tripods and it was shaking. And it's so powerful. So my question is, it's truth, but it's not all truth. It's unreliable truth, as you wrote in your memoir. Could you speak into that?
Can I speak to that? Well, memoir, you're looking at a particular maybe phase in your life from your point of view. So it's your truth, but someone else in the family may come up and say, well, it didn't happen that way. Well, of course it didn't happen that way for them, because they would have their own point of view, their own angle of perception. But for the memoirists, that's the way that it happened. And as they write and dig deeper and deeper and deeper, they may gain a new angle of perception on what had happened and understand what the meaning of it is for them, or what the meaning at one time before and now the meaning now. You know, what do they make of that particular time in their lives? So all of it isn't shown, as you just said, on the screen, but it's all underlying what the truth is.
And we're very much seeing that at the moment with the Epstein files. I think, was it last week, the women saying, you're not going to name them, we'll name them. It was our experience. So I think that's part of the pioneering and opening the floodgates.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, those women are so courageous. And then for our president to say right afterwards, well, it's just a Democratic hoax, which goes to the way women are perceived by a particular group in our country right now, and also probably around the world. It's the patriarchy saying, well, women's voice doesn't matter.
And yet they're standing up anyway. It takes great courage.
Right, yeah.
Could we spin back in time to your work with Joseph Campbell and the moment where you presented your work to him, and when he said the women don't need to make the journey in the whole mythological tradition, the woman is there. All she has to do is realise that she is the place people are trying to get to. Can I hear in your words what that experience was for you and how that informed and evolved into the heroine's journey?
Yeah, well, I'm like to backtrack a little bit. That was 1981. And before that, I had been using his monomyth, The Hero's Journey, working with groups, both men and women. We would go through the stages, one stage per month, and go through 10 months to get through the entire journey. And it worked well for the men in the group, but it didn't work that well for the women in the group because they really wanted to talk about their wounding and the need for healing of the wounding. So I started to develop the heroine's journey. I mean, some of it mirrors Campbell's hero's journey, particularly the beginning, where my first stage is the separation from the feminine. His first stage is the call, kind of like what you asked me before, what was the call that brought me to this work. But so I knew Campbell because he used to come out to Santa Barbara to do weekend workshops for what was called the Human Relations Institute, which is now called Pacifica Graduate Institute. And he was a brilliant storyteller. He would give us a myth or a tale to enact and break us up into groups where we would enact the story.
Wow.
And I was his assistant in the sense that he would ask me to do a meditation to begin each lecture. So I had known him for a couple of years while I was working on the heroine's journey. And I went back to New York in 1981 for my sister's wedding. But at the same time, I got to meet with Mr. Campbell. And he looked at the monomyth that I had created, and he did say, Maureen, women don't need to make the journey because they are the place that everyone is trying to get to in the mythological tradition. And I had been listening to women talk about their journeys as a therapist and as a teacher for years. And the women of my generation were struggling. This was, the early 80s when women of my generation were out in the work world and trying to balance home and motherhood and work and had no models for it. And so what he was saying, and I came to understand this later, he meant mythologically that when he said woman, he really meant the feminine in terms of spirit or soul. But I took it quite literally that women didn't need to make a journey. And I said the women that I see in therapy as well as teach and my colleagues and my friends, we're all on a journey. And so I said to him I was going to continue working on it. And he did write me a letter afterwards asking, how far I had gotten with the heroine's journey. So he was very respectful. It was just, I wanted a different answer. But in some ways, it really inspired me to finish what became the book, which took me 8 years. So this was not something that I developed quickly. I really was developing through my work in groups with women as well as in my therapy practice.
Thank you for that. That's profound, and the way that you then was interpreting it, and then that you now reflecting back on what he possibly may have meant.
And also, he was a man in his probably late 70s at that time, married to Jean Erdman, who was this extraordinary dancer. So he did not have a marriage where there were children. So he didn't really see on a personal level what goes on in a family when the mother works outside the home. And Jean was his muse. So he lived a very mythological life, and I was living a very practical life.
Yeah, very different worlds. And it has been said that he cherry-picked myths, and it's easy to denigrate when you kind of turn between hero's journey, heroine's journey, to go, well, the hero's journey, he's done this and he's a man of his time, but both can coexist and should coexist.
Well, the heroine's journey, now it's 35 years old and it's in 23 languages. I mean, women 35 years ago, it was just starting to make an inroad, but more and more women are aware of it and are using it in film or in music or in their artwork or in theater. I get emails from people all the time saying, you know, can I actually use it in my art exhibit that happened last week? Or
that's magical.
I want you to know that I just composed an album around the heroine's journey. So it has touched people in their own journeys at different times in their lives.
That's absolutely magical, because from my perspective, how I came to discover you was, again, looking at the bookshelves from a film point of view and thinking and feeling like this was not the journey for me or the things that I would like to write about. And it was not out there at all. I had to really go seeking it. So it's so encouraging that it is filtering through. It is in the collective.
Right,
yeah.
Right. How did you find it?
Oh, that's actually a very good question. Well, I heard a screenwriter talking about the hero's journey, and I just thought, this feels so ill-fitting to me. And I went looking to see if there was a female version, and the internet existed. And sure enough, there you were. And so that was the doorway for me.
Thank you for telling me.
Yeah, no, it's been profound. Well, actually, that does bring me to the screenwriting lens. Does it, when you see all the films and the way the zeitgeist seem to have, the dominant narrative seemed to pick up the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell's work, and that it became the only way to tell or write stories or films, was that frustrating, or did you just watch it with a little bit of amusement?
It's both. Frustrating. And I think if I, think about some of the films are using the framework of the heroine's journey, whether they're saying that or not. But I love some of the recent films like Women Talking. Do you know that?
Yes. Oh, amazing.
Just amazing. And that seemed in a big way to me to incorporate all the stages of the heroine's journey, particularly the beginning separation of the feminine, separation from the mother, and how that the movie really ends with the healing of that mother-daughter split as the women talk through what they're going to do to address the fact that they've been sexually not only harassed, but raped. And are they going to stay there and try to address it in the community, or have they decided to leave? And these are daughters and mothers beginning to realize, well, the mothers are beginning to realize they really had not protected their daughters well enough. And so there was that coming together, that healing of the mother-daughter split. And then they decide to leave. Talk about courage.
Because Sarah Polley directed that, and I don't know who wrote it, but I think it was based on a memoir. And how this collective unconscious is turning into the collective consciousness, and it's being written about through art and memoir, how that really is rising. There is a rising coming up.
Yeah, it really is. It's almost like the rise of the Black Madonna.
Yeah.
In the 80s, people started reading about mythological goddesses, and the Black Madonna became a focus of a lot of pilgrimage. And it's like she's emerging out of the 1100s. We're starting to really honor the sacred feminine. And as you just said, these women became conscious through the body, actually. So for a lot of women, it's becoming conscious through the body and then speaking their truth and then taking action.
I would love you to explain the myth of inferiority and deficit thinking, what that is about. I mean, it's a big fat clue in your book, which has the subtitle A Women's Quest for Wholeness. But what are those terms about?
Well, let me backtrack a little bit because the stages of the heroine's journey. First, there's the separation from the feminine, which I mentioned a bit, with the perception of the feminine being weak or passive or angry or ineffectual. Second stage is an identification with the masculine, seeing the father or the father figure or the patriarchy as having the power and thinking this is the only way that I'm going to have power in the world is to identify with the masculine. The third stage is the road of trials. And one of those trials is the myth of deficit thinking or the myth of inferiority, meaning that female is less than male. And it's a earworm
Yeah.
that we get as little girls. There is that sense of being inferior really from birth. And in some cultures, it's quite specific that if you're born in a female body, you are less than and you have no rights. And so that's what I meant about deficit thinking. A lot of women experience the imposter syndrome. They succeed and they don't give themselves enough credit. They might say, oh, well, it was just the culture at the time, or I was lucky. I mean, I hear so many women say, well, I was lucky, instead of, I really worked hard, I had a focus, and I achieved this, and I'm not an imposter. So, but I see that all the time, and it's because that's the culture that we grow up in.
It's interesting because the way you've explained it, I can even reflect on my own life. My mother, absorbing that deficit thinking by osmosis. The moment I was born, and she looked at me and went, "Oh my God, it's a girl." That's absorbed straight into the psyche of the small version of me.
Right. It was true while you were in utero. She was probably praying for a boy.
Yeah, and that's not an uncommon situation, especially in the world we live in.
And so many women hear, well, who do you think you are?
Very true. Even if they don't say it, they'll project it.
Right.
Getting a bit big for our boots, are we?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so have we all internalized this patriarchal voice? And if we do, especially where we are now, the way that the collective is really, really rallying around that voice, what can we do about it?
Can I read you something?
Please. Yes.
Because in some of my research, I found this, and I was so struck by it. We have to figure out how to bring the feminine and masculine together in the modern archetype of equality. And the words that come from that are reasonable woman, reasonable man archetype, which establishes values of integrity, wholeness, and dignity of the individual based on a ruling by a federal judge in the case called Ellison v. Brady, Protecting an Individual from Sexual Harassment. It defines what is acceptable behavior. So,
reasonable masculine, reasonable feminine archetype.
yes, reasonable woman, reasonable man archetype, establishing the values of integrity, wholeness, and dignity.
What's that from?
Well, that's a court case, Ellison v. Brady, Protecting an Individual from Sexual Harassment. I don't have the citation for that, but when I read that, I thought, he's saying that this is a legal document, that you've got to act with acceptable behavior. Now, unfortunately, in our country, we have a leader who cannot possibly do that. It's not part of his psyche. But I think women have the opportunity to talk about it. What is acceptable behavior? What is an acceptable relationship?
And within that, to act with integrity.
Right. And dignity.
And dignity. And dignity. I love that.
Yeah, and wholeness, which would bring together the healed feminine and the healed masculine.
Are we in the world in one of the stages of the heroine's journey? Is there something going on a bigger scale, I wonder?
It's certainly going on here in the United States, although we have a very active resistance right now that's mainly led by older women, or at least those are the ones that are getting to the streets. Unfortunately, many men, well, one particular, the cabinet member of the Department of Defense, has said quite verbally that women are inferior. I mean, it's just shocking.
And that they shouldn't have the right to vote.
And they shouldn't have the right to vote. And they shouldn't have contraception. And they certainly can't have abortion. They don't have sovereignty over their own bodies. But we're not going to allow that to happen. But yes, you're right. There's a swing back to the rise of the patriarchy. And I think a lot of it has to do with how strong the women's spirituality movement got, because God the Father is no longer the entity that is supreme. God the Mother is there as well. So, I mean, the culture is going through a descent, basically.
Yes, I think so. And as you were saying that, I could feel in my belly the kind of rage, and I think that's a collective ignition that's going on with many people, with many women and men, healed men as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how can we incorporate mythical themes and archetypes at work in the larger world that we live in and evolve through this, or in our writing even?
Well, for me, it's primarily through our writing. Because I still teach memoirs. So asking them, is there a mythic pattern underneath what you're writing? You may be writing about your personal relationship with your mother, but does it have any elements of the Demeter-Persephone myth? Or for men, there's a wonderful book, The Duke of Deception, where Jeff Wolfe wrote about trying to find his father, just like Telemachus tried to find Odysseus. His father, he was called the Duke of Deception because he was a liar. So who is the real father underneath all the lies? So it's a matter of being willing to look at archetypes and see if they're useful in writing. And I guess in the workplace, to look at relationships the power dynamics in relationships and see if there's any particular mythic themes that have evolved there.
And I'll move just to the writing or the creative or the artist. To wake the hell up, become aware and ask yourself what you are writing about rather than this is a book I want to write and what is underlying it. So really question, really be mindful, really be present in why is this art emerging for you? Did I hear that right?
Yeah, thank you. That was really well spoken. Yeah. Most people particularly go into memoir with a particular idea, and they never end up writing that particular idea because once they get started and really start to follow the image or follow the memory, it will take them someplace deeper, which may be very uncomfortable. But there'll be much more learning in that because memoir and myth, both of them are about making meaning. Like, what meaning can I make out of this particular incident or relationship in my life?
And sometimes you need to have distance from these relationships or events in our lives. And when I was doing documentary, the reason I became a therapist was because I was interviewing people about their trauma and it felt ethically very wrong and I didn't have the tools to support those questions. And now with retrospect, often people write about those traumatic episodes, but it's way too close. They need some distance first.
Right. Yeah. And the therapist really needs to give space and to hold the container in a very sacred way.
And it really shows from what you've been saying that it's really sacred work, storytelling, myth-making, memoir, film even.
Mm-hmm. They're all out of the same family.
Yeah.
Myth-making, storytelling, and film. It's all about telling an individual story that has collective resonance.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, shall we turn to the stages, the steps, and put the film lens on it? And whether you know the films or not, but just chat through each stage. And we can also bring in some of the interpersonal stuff as well.
Okay. Well, the first stage is the separation from the feminine. And, if you think even of fairy tales, mother is always dead, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So,
or pushes them out.
Yeah, or pushes them out, exactly. But what I meant in terms of separation from the feminine is how early as little girls we separate from our intuition, from our creativity, from our innate body sense, because we're trying to fit in the outer world. And also, I was also thinking of women who left a connection with the mother because whether the mother was depressed or was very controlling or passive or had no power, which was true of women, the mothers of my generation, who had no rights, basically. Certainly, they didn't have contraception, so they didn't have a choice about both child rearing and childbearing, and were left at home while the men went out to work. And anyway, so that was the early separation from the feminine.
And a beautiful film with that is After Sun. I don't know if you've seen it in 2022.
Yeah.
She's a Scottish filmmaker, and the premise is, I think it's Sophie. Yes, I didn't realise, but in the write-up they say she's now a mother. She's disconnected from her experience and her past, but the whole thing starts back in the 80s when she's holding a little camcorder and her father has taken her on a holiday to Spain and he's deeply depressed. So she's filming him in moments when he doesn't know that he's kind of leaking through this depression. Her mother is absent and it's with him. So there's a real separation from the feminine and she identifies with the masculine. So I think that's a beautiful example of that stage too.
Yeah, it's a great stage. I mean, a great movie. I'd like to watch it.
Yeah.
I also thought of Lady Bird.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because Lady Bird is fighting with her mother during the whole film because she wants to go off to New York and become a writer. They live in Sacramento, California. And her mother really is very protective, but Lady Bird just struggles against her. And it really isn't until the very last scene that she realizes that her mother really wanted the best for her, but Lady Bird couldn't see it. I mean, it's a great rites of passage film.
It's beautiful. And there's that scene where they're arguing in the car and Lady Bird just opens the door and jumps out. Like, talk about separation.
Yeah, that was quite physical, wasn't it? Yeah. So the second stage, and you've already mentioned it, is the identification with the masculine. And there's several films, and you had mentioned the Devil Wears Prada. The Meryl Streep character plays a very, very masculine character, and the assistant realizes that she's getting sucked into that same way of being, and she leaves, which doesn't always happen.
Yes, that whole masculinized workplace, and that's a great example. Yeah.
Right.
And you mentioned Erin Brockovich.
Yes, yeah. And I also think about her in terms of Road of Trials, because she was not going to let anything get in her way. And she says in the film, these might not be the exact words, but people underestimate me. And I'm pretty sure she didn't say it exactly like that.
I remember that moment.
Yeah. And I'm not going to allow that to happen anymore. And she was driven not only to succeed in her job, but also to take care of her family, which she reiterated over and over, saying, I've got 3 children and no one is taking care of them except me. So I thought that was very, very powerful. And it was...
Yes, that was very much the Road of Trials as well, like you mentioned. So that's stage 3.
Stage 3, which also includes the myth of inferiority, the myth of dependency, and the myth of romantic love. And in that movie, we actually see she doesn't succumb to the myth of romantic love because George does help her out by taking care of the kids, but he wants something in return, and she doesn't have time for that. So she doesn't. So anyway.
She's a great character, and she's a great character in what we were talking about before about women going, I didn't just get here, I worked really hard, and I'm naming that.
Right, yeah. And she did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's fierce.
She had a very positive ally in her boss who, at first, because of her appearance, did not believe how smart she was. And at the end, rewards her with a $5 million check, which I loved.
Beautiful film.
She earned it. Yeah.
So the 4th stage.
Experiencing the boon of success and awakening to feelings of spiritual aridity. There is this stage of feeling, okay, I did everything I was supposed to do. I got all of the degrees I was supposed to get. I got the corporate job. I had finished my dissertation and got my PhD. I did this, I did that, and why do I feel so empty? And so that's what I meant by spiritual aridity. The woman is starting to look at what sacrifices did I make, feeling this real sense of loss and grieving. knowing that the whole focus in the first part of the heroine's journey is very outer focused, and then all of a sudden realizing, who am I? So that's the spiritual aridity.
And in that there was a play which is now going to be a movie called Prima Facie, written by an Australian playwright. And it was a lawyer, a young lawyer from Liverpool who is playing by the rules, playing the man's game, defending rapists essentially against the women who've been raped. And then she is sexually abused by a colleague. And so when she is abandoned by the law, she faces that spiritual aridity and says, I did everything that you wanted for me. I played, I achieved, I got greatness, and now I'm being completely abandoned. It's a nice example of that moment when she starts her descent.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, it's a perfect illustration. So the next stage is the descent. And what I meant by that is women get to a certain place, and whether it's a time where they have enormous loss, whether it's the loss of a job or their children leave and go to college, so it's empty nest, or they go through a divorce, or it's a geographical move, or it's the loss of a friendship, which for women is very, very deep grief, or it's the loss of a spouse. Anyway, the descent is a time of recalling the initial separation from the feminine. What did I lose in that initial separation? Did I lose my intuition? Did I lose my yearning for creativity? Did I lose my voice? And really becoming aware of those things and grieving them. I remember one time a woman at a lecture that I was giving at a university stood up in the back and she said, I've been going through what you call in your book voluntary isolation because I was the head of a company and I got to a point where I just left one day and I went home and I've been in my bedroom for the last 9 months trying to figure out who I am. And my husband and my children keep asking me to come back to who I was. And who I was not who I want to be. So that happens oftentimes in the descent, but it takes a lot of courage to say, I'm not going to repeat the old patterns.
Yeah. Is that a very much a midlife thing?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But it's not only midlife. I've seen women in their 20s or 30s, late 30s, who also then realize they may not have a child. And so there's the grieving about the loss of that dream.
Everything, everywhere, all at once, I think sounds very much that descent, which is, I think, the Chinese in a laundry working in the family, and the daughter is rebelling from her family, and then she literally goes into this wild world where she's having to face her shadow self.
Yeah. So the next stage is the urgent yearning to reconnect with the feminine. And what I meant at that stage was for women who have been identified by men their whole lives or by the culture their whole lives, it's a remembering who they are as women and deciding who they want to be as a woman. And oftentimes women join women's groups. They start doing rituals around the stages of the moon or the solstices, and also looking at women of power and the differences between the way women take on power and the way men take on power, that women really focus on community and collaboration and instead of self-aggrandizement. So I think there's an identification there with what is power.
and they reconnect through networking and the strength.
Right. And writing and performing and expressing their creativity. The next stage is the healing the mother-daughter split. And what I meant in that stage is really becoming a good mother to yourself. Most of us want to have the mother who takes perfect care of us, and we forget that she's a woman. So what parts of our own feminine nature did we cut off from in that initial separation from the feminine? And in terms of the actual mother-daughter split, if there's some way, whether it's writing a letter to your mother or a letter to your daughter, to really address the issue of the split and what that means, and is it possible to have some forgiveness there, whether the mother is alive or not. I mean, we can still write letters after a person has died.
And the film that's quite good with that is Barbie. There's no mother in Barbie. There's no father either. But once she comes back from the real world she's really healing that split by bringing it back into her internalized self.
Yes, and there was a mother, or actually two mothers.
Yes.
In the film. There was the mother and daughter. And at first, the daughter doesn't want to have anything to do with the mother. And then as the movie continues, she sees what a strong person her mother is. And they then work together with Barbie.
That's so true. Networked, connected.
Yeah. And the other mother is Ruth Handler, who was the mother of Barbie.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and that scene where Ruth speaks to Barbie and all of the Barbies and the men is so healing. She asked her, you can choose to stay as you are in being a perfect woman, or you can change. And so the archetype of mother gives her the choice, which I thought was really powerful.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And I know we're short for time, so what's the next stage?
Next stage is healing the wounded masculine. And what I meant by that is we all have aspects of the masculine within ourselves. So starting to identify what the wounded aspects of the masculine are, as well as what the positive aspects of the masculine are. And the fact that oftentimes we project those wounded aspects on the men in our lives, whether they're spouses or bosses or brothers or fathers or sons, and taking back the projection and becoming aware of your own wounded aspects of the masculine. To give you an example, one of the issues that I see as the wounded masculine is the driver that never takes time to stop to take a breath, but always has to do the next thing, and never takes the body into consideration. I grew up with a father who was a driver, and I became a driver. And that's fine in short things, but
it has consequences on everything, health, relationships.
Health is a big consequence. When I was writing Father's Daughters, Breaking the Ties That Bind, I got very sick. And it was because I was driving and driving and driving to finish on deadline, and it was bad for my body. So I really had to look at that within myself.
And is Harry Potter very much that his journey is healing the masculine within him?
Yeah, say more.
In the fact that his parents were killed, he's severed off from his masculine, and yet he gathers his allies around him. He's got his 3 friends as he delves into the underworld and reconnects with Voldemort.
Yeah, he who must not be named.
Correct, yes.
That's what we call Trump.
Let's see if he can heal the masculine, maybe in the next lifetime.
Next lifetime. So the last part is the integration of the masculine and feminine. So we don't reject the parts that we have developed. We just bring the two together. And that's a hopeful, very hopeful phase. I see that as the more we can develop equality, like in our country, we haven't passed the Equal Rights Amendment yet after 100 years of trying, but finding more balance in our lives and trying to be aware of how to bring equality into our lives and into our workplaces.
I like that you say that it's hopeful, because it's something we can all try to aim for internally in the stories we write and in the world at large that we're living in 2025.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
We are at time. I don't want to take any more of your time. Maureen Murdock, it's been such a lovely conversation. I am so grateful to you.
Well, I'm grateful to you too. Thank you very much for reaching out and inviting me to talk with you.
Well, thank you for saying yes.
You're welcome.
The Storymakers Rebellion is created on the unceded lands of the Bundjalung Nation in New South Wales, Australia. For tens of thousands of years, storytellers have nurtured a kinder, more connected world. Thank you for listening.